Good evening and welcome to the Utopian Baseball Universe. Tonight is Thursday, March 4th. I'm Joey Buchholz. Tonight we are looking at the Tampa Bay Rays, a team that was in the playoff hunt until the last couple days of the year last year, a team that hit really well, finished 8th in hitting, 23rd in pitching. They made a splash at free agency at starting pitchers. We'll talk about that later. Towards the end of the show, if you guys have any comments or questions, we'll get to all of those at the end. And we'll, of course, reveal the entire roster tonight, the opening day lineup. I'll take a look at some of their schedule. But before we do that, I want to bring on my guest tonight. His name is Chuck Johnson. Chuck, thanks for being here tonight.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Chuck, do you remember who brought you in?
Yes, Eric.
Eric, so I obviously I knew that, but Eric, when he found out that you were going to be on tonight, he was so excited he changed his entire day to focus around tonight's show.
So I like to say that Eric and I worked together for a really long time separately. So he was with Milwaukee when I was with Seattle, and then he left to go to Seattle, and I went to Milwaukee. So our paths, I knew him, but didn't know him, if that makes sense. I would see him around the ballpark, whether it would be spring training or the fall league. And then when we finally actually met, it was like, hey, you look familiar. I know you. And then we've been friends probably 9 or 10 years now, personal friends, but we were acquaintances for a few years before that. So Eric's a good guy. He knows his stuff.
Well, nice. Before we actually get into some of your baseball memories, why don't you tell the viewers what kind of work you've been doing with some of these teams?
Well, I grew up in an Eastern League town in Connecticut. So I had seen probably a dozen or so, minor league games before I actually ever saw my first major league game. So I grew up, I remember seeing Bobby Bonds play and Richie Zisk and Gene Kleins and all those guys back in Double-A. And then obviously, I went to work for the Eastern League in '79, and I was with them for the better part of 6 or 7 years. And I saw Ricky Henderson play with Jersey City, and Wade Boggs with Bristol, and Ryan Sandberg and Reading, and Corey Snyder with Waterbury, and on and on. So that stopped in '87, and then we moved out here in '92, and that was right around when the fall league started. So I went to work for them in '92, their very first year as a player assistant or a player volunteer. Then got added to the payroll and did some stuff for them for a few years. Excuse me, did a little bit with the Diamondbacks. Like I said, was with Seattle for 3 years. Milwaukee for 7. Now I'm with MLB AM now with assigned to the Rangers, doing rookie league, doing official scoring.
Nice. Tell us about some of your, early memories growing up, just becoming a fan. What teams did you cheer for as a kid? Who were some of your favorite players and memories growing up?
So I was originally, I'm a Yankee fan now primarily and have been most of my life, but I was actually a Phillies fan first. My mom had found out through some family history that we were related to some Civil War general or whatever he was and stuff. Well, back in the 60s, the only way you can actually find that stuff out was to actually go to the place and do the research. For 5 or 6 years in the mid-'60s, our summer vacations from school would be spent in Gettysburg. So my mom could go to the library and we would listen to the Phillies games on the radio. So I remember listening to the radio, and news broke in that Richie Allen would be out for the rest of the season because he broke his hand pushing his car up a hill, and it went through the headlamp, and Chris Short threw a no-hitter, I think, and Clay Dalrymple, and so that's where it started. And then my grandfather's older brother lived across the street from the players' entrance to Fort Lauderdale Stadium where the Yankees trained. And if a player caught a hold of one and pulled it over the right field grandstand, the ball would end up in his front yard. So they'd come out in the afternoon sometimes, and there'd be a couple of balls in the yard, and my grandfather would walk across the street and wait for the players to come out of the locker room and sign it, and then he would bring them home. And every once in a while, you go to a game and get a program, and you do the same thing. And I've got I think it's a 70 or a 71 program, Washington Senators program, and Ted Williams was the manager. Williams signed it, and Kurt Flood signed it, and Denny McClain signed it, and Frank Howard signed it. So I have that. So that kind of just, cemented the whole thing, and it just took off from there. But yeah, it's pretty cool stuff.
What do you think of today's game as far as, for the most part, what I see now, it's a lot of, home run or strikeout type of game. As compared to when I grew up in the 80s, it was more, make contact, steal bases, hit and run. What is your impression of where the game itself is going in that aspect?
It's kind of sad, to be honest with you. I mean, we clearly have a commissioner that doesn't like his sport. And the fact that the owners gave him a new contract pretty much tells you that the owners don't really care about their sport either. It's all about the dead presidents and the Benjamins and whatever that's lining their bank accounts. That, what we're doing now with the over-reliance on analytics and the over-reliance on launch angle and exit velo and juiced baseballs and all that stuff. It's designed to bring people to the game. It's just like football changing rules to increase offense, and basketball changing rules to increase offense. Baseball's doing the same thing. It's like Ralph Kiner always said, home run hitters drive Cadillacs. So, it's unfortunate. What we're watching and what I watch every day is not baseball, at least not the way that I grew up with it and the way we fell in love with the game. But it's what we got. We just have to make the best of it.
I noticed a couple of members of the universe today, I guess, were watching the Mets were on ESPN. And I guess the consensus is that the presentation of that game was so poor that a couple of them just turned the game off. Like they're not even showing the in-game action. It's constant interviews in the dugout. Everyone seems to be mic'd up. It just seems very gimmicky. And I don't know if that's just a spring training thing to, kind of get back into the swing of things. But I sure hope that that's not going to be the norm going forward. I hope that the networks that do carry these games, MLB, ESPN, TBS, I think has Saturday nights maybe. I hope the emphasis goes back to the game itself. Like I don't mind if you mic up a guy here and there, but from the little bit of what I saw today, it just seemed like it's alienating a lot of purists, I would say.
Well, I think a lot of it is still, we're still dealing with COVID-related issues. I don't think the announcers or the broadcasters are at the ballpark, and the spotters that they have in the press box to assist, with things like, fly ball directions and who caught it and whatever. I mean, I think those guys aren't at the ballpark. I know if you go to the MLB at Bat app and you go to look, there's no game day for a lot of these games. So that's what I do. And I can tell you I'm not at the ballpark. So if there's nobody at the ballpark doing the work, then they have to fill the gaps with other things. So if they have to mic players and if they have to, read 15 ads for Joe's coffee shop, then to fill the space, then that's what they have to do. But I'm hopeful, like you said, that this is just an initial spring training reaction, and by the time the season starts, everything is back to normal or close to it anyway.
I appreciate you bringing that perspective to the show because now that you say something like that, I guess that does make sense. I mean, it's a different world. It's a different atmosphere as far as how they're producing it. And, yeah, hopefully they can come around and get a little bit closer to normal. Speaking of, it was announced today here in Milwaukee that the Brewers are going to be hosting 25% capacity to start the season, which means we'll be at about 10,500, I would say, for opening day. What's the status on fans being at the game at Chase Field near where you live?
There were a number of press releases actually that came out today that announced that teams were going to be allowing a certain amount of fans. So I do know that Chase was in the 20 to 25,000 range, which is about, wait a minute, I don't think it was that much. It might have been less than that. I think they said 25% of capacity. Maybe that was it. So it's a 48,000 seat stadium, and they're going to look initially at 20 to 25%. So it's, whatever that comes out to. I'm not a mathematician, but I'll let somebody else figure it out. But I do know that a few other teams, had issued releases today announcing that they would have some attendance too. So, out here it's 2,000, 2,500 per game. Tickets sold out pretty quickly. It's hard, but if I'm not paying full price to watch a 7-inning game, or the manager stand up on the top step and wave a flag to signal the end of an inning because he doesn't want to make a pitching change, that's silly.
Yeah, these are the types of changes that I'm just not getting used to. Like today was my first chance to watch a Brewers game this spring training, and we turned it on, a couple hour in or so as the fourth inning. And the first thing out of Bill Schroeder's mouth was that this game's going to be 8 innings today. And I don't understand. Like, I guess he tried to explain it later in the show that between the start of spring, which I guess was March 1st or 2nd, and through the 13th or 14th, the managers meet the night before and they decide, okay, these are the pitchers I'm going to use. This is what we want to accomplish out of the game. How many innings do we want to go? And I guess Francona and council decided this is just going to be an 8-inning game today. Again, as a fan, if I bought a ticket to that, even though it's a spring training game, and I show up, let's say I bought that ticket a month ago, and I show up and they say, oh, today's going to be 5 innings or it's going to be 7 innings. I don't know if I'm taking that too well, needless to say. And I think a lot of people might share that sentiment.
So, I mean, if you really want to put it in perspective, spring training is a scam because players don't need 35 spring training games to get ready to play a regular season. The owners, it's 100% profit for the owners, just like the postseason is. The more games they make, the more they sell. If you ever come out to spring training and go to Milwaukee's camp and see all the out-of-state license, Wisconsin license plates in the parking lot, and the picnics and the barbecues and whatnot that they hold for the sponsors that come down from Milwaukee to do that. That's what this is all about. And that's great. There's nothing better than spring training. I'm not knocking spring training one bit. I work it. I make money at it. I enjoy it. I go do the games for free, but I would never tell anybody that because then they'd probably make me do it for free. But you go on the backfields and you have access to the players and you can watch AA guys or single A guys, taking batting practice against major league pitchers and vice versa. And it's just an awesome thing. But at the end of the day, if they can cut 20 games off of spring training and doubleheaders on Sundays during the regular season, all the issues that they'd have with pitcher burnout and all the issues that they would have with rest and stuff would solve themselves. What they're doing now, I don't understand it. I was watching the Dodgers game last night. Cincinnati had 2 guys on and just scored a run, and Dave Roberts went, that's it. Arias hit his pitch count. We're stopping it. And they left 2 runners on base. I said, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that just completely messes with the rhythm of a baseball game. I think at this point, pandemic or no pandemic, if this is going to be the norm for spring training going forward, I think it's fraud to market these as spring training games. Let's just call them scrimmages. I wouldn't even announce opponents. I would just say, okay, the Brewers are going to be on the field today for a couple hours. This is what they're trying to accomplish, looking at pitchers and just getting people ready for the season. But again, if I'm at a game, it doesn't really matter if it's spring training, regular season, postseason, summer league, little league. If I'm invested in it and there's 2 on with 1 out and the manager has the option to just say, we're done here, to me that's not baseball.
I heard the same thing that you did. The 1st to the 15th is going to be Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. from the 15th to the end of the year, it's going to be regular spring training. We have a lot of guys in spring training camp now that, for whatever reasons, opted out of last year. Minor league seasons were canceled. So there's got a lot of guys here in camp now that haven't had any reps since 2019. I totally get why they're doing it, but they should have made that perfectly clear to every single person that stood in front of a box office in February lining up to buy tickets to tell them what they were paying for. There's no reason that there couldn't have been somebody standing up front with a sign saying, games 1st to the 15th or 7 innings or whatever the case may be, and let people decide that. Because again, if I'm paying $30 for a box seat and the manager comes out and says we're only playing 7 innings, and I have the option of leaving the other team's bases loaded, be in the middle of an inning because my pitcher's hit his count, then you shouldn't be charging money for that.
Yeah, totally agree. Like, I think if they would have, like you said, just came out up front and said, hey, this is what it is for the first 2 weeks, I think some people that would have bought tickets may not have done that. And then some may have still done that. And then, at least you have the option, kind of knowing full well what you're buying, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck, let me ask you this. When the season starts, so you work spring training for the Rangers now, but when the season starts, what's your preferred method of following games? Do you like watching them on TV? Do you like listening on the radio? How many games do you see a year in person?
So the last year that I worked full-time was 2014, and I did the whole Brewers home spring training, which I think was 17 games. I think the World Baseball Classic was that year, so we got a couple of those games. I did some high school games during the summer, and then the Arizona League started in June and runs through Labor Day, so that's another 30 perhaps, and then another 20 games of fall league that runs through right the week before Thanksgiving. I did 111 in person.
Nice.
Last year was the first year since 1999, I think, where I worked no games where the choice was not mine to make. Obviously, when my daughter was born, I took a couple of years off and that kind of stuff. But when the choice was mine to make, or not mine to make, I take that back. When the choice was not mine to make, the last year I did not work a game was 1999. So my personal preference, I come home from work, I do a little bit of a workout, have something to eat, and I surf the MLB app. And, if I see in a Twitter that, somebody and, if Yelich hit a 3-run homer, and I'll go watch the replay of it, and then I'll go and I'll watch another replay on another game or something. And then I just watch whatever night game is on here. So, I'm pretty much always attuned to the game, whether I'm watching it or listening to it as a background noise. That depends on what I'm doing, but there's a game on literally every day.
Yeah, me too. Last year was the first year I didn't purchase the MLB.TV or whatever it is where you get all the games. I hope to do that this year. I haven't fully decided yet because I know I think the announcement was made yesterday that AAA is pushing their season back by a month. So I just want to make sure that MLB kind of starts on time before I'm throwing that type of money at them. Chuck, you have a funny or an interesting Gorman Thomas story you'd like to share?
So Bill Schroeder runs fantasy camp. So fantasy camp, the players come out. The players come out and whatever. So they have a theme. Fantasy camp has a theme. So in 2012, they did the 30th anniversary of the 1982 team. So Bill pulled no punches. He had Moose Haas, and he had Pete Ladd, and he had Ogilvy and Charlie Moore and Cooper, and I think Pete Vukovich was there. It was a couple of days, and he left early because he had an emergency at home, and Jerry Augustine was there. And he tried for the longest time to get Gorman to come out, and Gorman wouldn't come out. He's had some health problems post-retirement, and, he's just not – that's not his thing. But he managed to get him there. It's the story he pointed. So he ended up getting Gorman. So the first day of camp, is they have basically a tryout. It's just like spring training. And then they have a meeting afterwards, and they pick their teams, and then they'll play Tuesday through Friday. They'll play round robin games. You play a couple games in the morning, you break for lunch, and you play a couple games in the afternoon. They let the guys play night games in the stadium with the lights on and the whole thing. Saturday, the four best teams, they have two semifinal games in the morning, and then they have the finals in the final championship game in the afternoon. And then afterwards, everybody gets suits and ties on and goes back, and they have the rewards banquet before everybody goes home. After the championship game, the players will go out and they're in uniform, and they'll go out and they'll hit. So you get to see Cecil Cooper in his Brewers 1982 uniform hitting line drives and whatever. So they tried to get Gorman in the cage, and Gorman wouldn't get in the cage. And he wouldn't get in the cage, and he wouldn't get in the cage. And finally, we look up and we can see him, and he's taking his jacket off, and he's looking for a bat. And I heard later, which I was not able to confirm, that someone had bet him $1,000 that he couldn't get one out, or he couldn't hit one hop the wall, or whatever the case was. So he gets in the cage, and he's old and stiff, and so in Arizona, I don't know if you've ever been there spring training out here, but in Arizona, they have grass berms in the outfield. People can buy a ticket, bring a blanket, sit on the outfield with the kids. The kids roll down the hill. You chase batting practice balls. It's a cheap seat. You bring the whole family, and there's concessions out there and the whole thing. Well, in Maryvale, where the Brewers play, it's about 385 to left center. And then the berm goes up about 35 feet. And then on top of the berm is the scoreboard. And to hit the scoreboard, you have to hit it about, conservatively speaking, you have to hit it about 435, 440. So Gorman's in the cage, and he's swinging, and he's hit little toppers down the third base line. I think he might have swung and missed a couple of times. And he'd swing in 5 pitches, and he'd get out, and he'd stretch his back, and he'd stiff, he'd go back in, and he'd swing a couple of more times. And he did this 4 or 5 times, and I think Jerry Augustine was pitching, and all of a sudden he hit one, and you can hear the sound of the bat, and it sounded like a gunshot. So and you understand that Gorman is now 61 years old when he's doing this. This is 2012.
Okay.
So he's 61. And he had one swing that was 30-year-old Gorman Thomas, and he caught it perfect, and he hit the freaking scoreboard. And then he turned around, and he did like a bat flip, and then he walked over where Ogilvy was standing, and he kind of stuck his hand out like cash. So that's what made me think that I heard it after that's what happened, is he made a bet with somebody, but he walked over with his hand out like, okay, pay up kind of thing. So that's Gorman.
See, I've never been to a fantasy camp, but stories like that would be worth the whole price of admission to see something like that happen.
And then at the end, he brings in Robin Yount, and he brings in Bob Uecker, and if it's close enough to spring training, and some of the guys that live here, they'll show up. So I remember Corey Hart was there one year and came out and talked to the guys, and all they do is, Yount's got his uniform on, and he signs 100 autographs and takes 300 pictures, and guys follow him around like he's got a port, like like he's in a pasture with a pork chop tied around his neck, and all the little wolves are following him around. So you can't get away from him.
Chuck, before we kind of dive into this Rays roster, as just a general fan of baseball, this concept that I'm presenting, the Utopian Baseball Universe, if there was one pitcher versus batter matchup that you would pay money to see, any pitcher and any batter from history, which one would you most likely want to see?
Boy. To narrow it down to just one, oh man, that would be.
You can certainly name more.
I would like to have seen Babe Ruth and Greg Maddux. I would want to see maybe like Jimmy Fox and Randy Johnson. Sandy Koufax and DiMaggio.
Okay.
as far separate from the eras as you could possibly get them. Because I know there's a lot of people who believes that if Babe Ruth played today, he'd never make a major league roster. And if Barry Bonds played in 1920, he'd hit 1,000 homers. And, if that's your opinion, God bless you, but you couldn't be more wrong on either side. But I just think that, to see things like that and have Babe Ruth face Greg Maddux with a 1998 baseball and have Sandy Koufax pitch to Joe DiMaggio or Ted Williams with a 1935 baseball. See can you spin it more? Can the curveball break more? Can you cut it? Can you make it move like they do now? That would be the fun part. Whether they hit 800 against each other or struck out 10 times, it wouldn't make any difference. It's what can you do with somebody else's equipment, kind of thing.
Just so you know, every matchup that you've mentioned, and some that I'm seeing in comments that we'll get to in a couple minutes, all of those are going to happen this year in the Utopian Baseball Universe. Let's take a look now at the schedule for the Rays. Obviously not the whole schedule, but we'll look at some highlights here. The Rays are actually going to open the season at Baltimore on Friday, March 26th. Their home opener is a week from then. It'll be April 2nd versus the Blue Jays. Memorial Day at Kansas City. Independence Day at the Twins. On Labor Day, they'll be hosting the champion Atlanta Braves. The Braves won the Utopian last year. And the Rays are going to finish the season at St. Louis. So opening the season at Baltimore, let's see what Joe Madden is going to go with for a starting lineup. And again, I say this in every show, yes, Joe Madden has my cell phone number. And this is what we're going with on opening day. Leading off and playing left field, Carl Crawford. Batting second, third baseman, Evan Longoria. Batting third, first baseman, Fred McGriff. Cleanup hitter, right fielder, Randy Arozarena. Batting fifth, center fielder, Austin Meadows. Batting sixth, second baseman, Ben Zobrist. Batting seventh, catcher, Jose Molina. Batting eighth, shortstop, Willie Adames. And then for the second straight year, pitching and batting ninth on opening day, David Price. And then we'll get Chuck's reaction here shortly, but I want to get to the rest of the position players for the Rays for 2021. We've got Deoner Navarro, Carlos Pena, Brandon Lowe, Akinori Awamura, Yunel Escobar, Kevin Kiermaier, B.J. Upton, and Ben Grieve, who spent a year or two here in Milwaukee. Chuck, where did I go wrong with this Rays roster?
It's not wrong. It's the pieces that you thought were the best fit for this particular version of the Rays. You at the top of the lineup, you clearly have, without much argument or debate, I think the two best players in franchise history as far as Crawford and Longoria go. If you believe in some of those advanced analytics and some of those ranking systems that they used, then Ben Zobrist in 2008 or 2009, I can't remember which, had the single greatest offensive year or single best season in Rays franchise history. Kiermaier certainly deserving of being on the list. My shortstop, when I was going through my list this morning, and I just ranked them based on games played. There was no other method to what I was doing, and I had Julio Lugo at short just because he has the most appearances at short. I had BJ Upton down there as well, but again, we're pretty much right on. Carlos Pena deserves to be on the roster as well. I mean, not taking anything away from Fred. He depending on again how you think of that particular era. People think that Fred's a Hall of Famer, and you can't argue with that. And I think I had John Flaherty as catcher too. So Molina, if you got a Molina behind the plate, you're doing all right. Doesn't matter which one.
So some of the bigger names that we're not hearing are on other rosters. So some of the obvious ones: Wade Boggs is with Boston, Canseco with Oakland. Trying to think of some other names.
Well, neither of those guys should be on this roster anyways. But Canseco only played here 1 year, I think. So he's.
I had some Rays fans who follow me on Twitter. They're like, "Do we have Boggs? Do we have Canseco?" And I said, "Well, no." I kind of tried to place guys on the teams that you would most associate them with, but at the same time, I wanted to give the Rays some names. Fred McGriff's not going to get any starts in Atlanta over who I have for that roster, so he fits here well. So yeah, it just made sense.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at the pitching, the rest of the starting rotation. David Price going on opening day versus Baltimore. Blake Snell stays in Tampa Bay, so he'll be going game 2. Chris Archer. And then the Rays start a series with the Nationals right after that, and we're going to see Tyler Glasnow. And then the big free agent signing for the Rays in January, Negro League Hall of Famer Hilton Smith will get the ball game 5 before the Rays go back to David Price in game 3 against the Nationals. Also on this roster, James Shields and Alex Cobb, in case one of these 5 were to go down. The bullpen, we've got Fernando Rodney, Roberto Hernandez, Alex Colon, Nick Anderson, Brad Boxberger, Esteban Yan, and Jake McGee. Now, admittedly, I don't know as much about the Rays as I do some other teams. Are there any obvious names that I'm leaving out here for Tampa Bay?
So the only 2 starters that I wrote down, and again, this is game started. It's no magic potion here or anything. The only 2 that I have on my list that you don't have on yours are Jake Odorizzi and Scott Kazmir.
And so Kazmir I had last year, and just the way the chips fell, Kazmir pitched not too great last year, so I left him off. It doesn't mean we won't see him again. And Odorizzi is going to be a name that Rays fans should hear in the future, as I purposely do leave off some names each year so that each team, the fans of each team, have a nice Christmas gift when we look at upgrading rosters at the end of this season.
So Kazmir was designated for assignment.
Kazmir remains in the organization. Well, I'm sure we'll see him again at some point. But one thing that's different from this year from last year, admittedly, this was all put together very quickly, and the rosters were unbalanced. And when I say that, I mean some teams had just 5 starting pitchers, some had 8, some had 3 catchers, some had 2. This year, I wanted everything to be equal, so every team has 2 of every position. 2 catchers, 2 first basemen, and so on. 7 starting pitchers, 7 relievers, and then anyone that played last year that I didn't include this year remains property of that team. So as of now, this is year 2. We're not going to have big free agent movement from team to team, but we will bring in people, 2 or 3 names a year to kind of keep it fresh. There's some Hall of Famers that aren't in the Utopian Baseball universe, and that was not an omission. You will see those names pop up over the next 5 years or so. Chuck, we do have a number of comments and maybe some questions here. We'll get to these. So Rick Lenenberg says, I'm here to see Chuck Johnson and listen to his great insights. Chuck has been a fantastic guest. We might have, just a little spoiler here, we might have Chuck back very soon. Tune in, and we might have Chuck back at some point. Andy says Dickie V loves him some Rays. He better get on the UWM train, baby. Yeah, Dickie V is one of the biggest Rays fans. I actually made a baseball card of Dickie V last year. Andy says, I don't mind the fewer innings per game in doubleheaders, but I'm with you on the single games. 9 innings, please. Yeah, I mean, for spring training, I don't think there are doubleheaders in spring training. I do mind 7-inning doubleheaders during the season because that's Little League to me. That's softball. But, there's other things I like worse. I'll put it that way. Tim says MLB games on Sirius Radio are awesome. Yes, I was a Sirius subscriber for a couple years. I agree. Andy loves your story, Chuck, about fantasy camp. That Gorman Thomas story, I think, was the MVP tonight. Thank you. Tim wants to see Sandy Koufax versus Tony Gwynn. I think we can all agree on that. And Koufax and Gwynn are in the same division, so we're going to see that hopefully a lot this year. Geeker wants to see Babe Ruth versus Greg Maddux. That will happen. Cubs and Yankees play each other 3 games at some point. So at some point, Ruth will get his licks in against Maddux. Andy wants to see any pitcher in a pitcher's duel any pitcher versus Josh Gibson. Josh Gibson, a member of the Durham Bulls in the Utopian Baseball Universe. Tim says, who doesn't have Joey's number? Well, all the managers do, that we know. And anyone, I get at least 2 phone calls a day for people wanting to alert me about a car warranty, even though I sold my car in 2018. Andy says, Prime Fernando saves games like it's going out of style. Fernando Rodney was one of the guys I could have put on like 8 different rosters, but he ended up here in Tampa Bay. Can Kazmir go back to the Mets for Victor Zambrano? Yeah, I wish the Mets could undo a lot of those trades. Rick has a question for Chuck. Chuck, what's your take on the phone extra inning rule?
Assuming he means the runner on second base to start the 10th inning.
I'm assuming. Rick, if you're still watching, if you want to clarify that.
It's we do that in the Arizona League, in the Rookie League, and the scoring software that MLB uses doesn't even recognize it. So some of the tricks and some of the things that we have to do to make it work are pretty interesting. It's counted as an unearned run to the team, not to the pitcher. Yeah, it's no good. And Rick did clarify that's what he was asking. For my take on it is, of all the gimmicks that they introduced last year, I was against most of them to start. I will admit when I was wrong. I hate the extra inning thing. I can't stand it. But admittedly, and I didn't like this at all to begin with, but the extended playoffs last year I enjoyed. And the reason why is that my favorite sporting event of all of them is March Madness. 64 team, or whatever it is now, it's 68 teams, I think. But I kind of like the idea of a 1 versus an 8 in each league. And then I loved having the 1 seed host all the games. So you are giving them an advantage. But I was kind of hoping they would keep that for this year, but it looks like they're gonna go back to the 10 teams, which I'm okay with as well. If you're gonna have any type of wild card, I don't mind if it's 10 or 16, because I personally miss when it was just the championship series, 2 teams from each league, because the regular season meant more at that point. But if you are gonna go with a wild card, you might as well just make it 16 is what I think. So here's my thing, and I tell people this all the time. The best thing about baseball is it's not any other sport. Stop trying to fix it. There's nothing wrong with it. You can't improve on perfection. If baseball is the only sport that the regular season matters. Baseball is the only sport where the postseason is different. because there's so few teams vying for the same prize. Who wants to have a below 500 team make the postseason, and then like the Phoenix Suns did in the bubble last year, go 8-0 and almost get in, and so get rid of the 7-inning doubleheaders, get rid of the extra inning runner on second base, get rid of the instant replay. You don't need instant replay. You need better umpires. Just stop with the bullshit and just play the game.
I agree with everything you're saying, Chuck. Yeah, Tim says amen, Chuck, too. So I think there's a consensus here that a lot of the changes are kind of gimmicky. Again, some of them I am more accepting of others, but the whole the 7-inning doubleheaders and the guy in second thing I don't like at all. Chuck, I want to thank you so much for being a great guest tonight. Hopefully we'll have you on again very soon. Spring training games will resume tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Thanks for giving me a kind of a day off from that today. Because when the season starts, there are no days off for me. Tomorrow's show is going to be a great one. 7 o'clock Central Time, New York Yankees, Tommy Midro. We're going to have him on at 7. Saturday night, Andrew Pfeffer, the Milwaukee Brewers. That's going to be a really fun show. And then Sunday night is our Philly show. And like I said, we might see Chuck again at some point. Thanks again, Chuck.
Appreciate it, Joey. Thank you.
We'll talk soon. And to everyone watching tonight, thank you for watching. And we'll see you tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Have a great night.
See y'all.